Have you ever noticed that a family can tolerate years of unhealthy behavior, but the moment someone sets a boundary, suddenly everyone has a problem? The yelling was tolerated, the gossip was tolerated, the manipulation was tolerated, the criticism was tolerated, the disrespect was tolerated, the emotional outbursts were tolerated, the silent treatment was tolerated. But then somebody finally says, no, I'm not comfortable with that, or I'm not going to keep having this conversation, or if you yell at me, I'm going to leave, or we're not discussing my marriage, we won't be coming this year. And then suddenly that person becomes the problem. Now they're selfish, they're disrespectful, they're unforgiving, they're controlling, they're dramatic, they're tearing the family apart. Why does this happen? Why can a dysfunctional family tolerate the behavior that created the problem, but punish the person who finally responds to it with a boundary? That's what we're talking about today. And for those that are new here, I'm John LaFrance, and this is Cleave Answers, a series where we talk about difficult family relationships, boundaries, marriage, estrangement, reconciliation, faith, and of course, healing through both a psychological and a spiritual lens. And if you've ever felt like saying no somehow turned you into the villain, well, this conversation today is for you. So let's start at the beginning. The boundary is not the first problem. Now, this is where I think a lot of people get confused. A boundary is often introduced late in the story, very late, in fact. There may have been years of tension before it, years of hurt, years of unresolved conflict, years of someone crossing a line, years of somebody saying, just let it go. Years of trying to keep the peace. Then eventually, one person says, I can't keep doing this. And because the boundary is new, it becomes the most visible thing. So the family tells itself, everything was fine until you changed. But often, everything was not fine. The boundary did not necessarily create the problem. The boundary may simply be the first time someone stopped absorbing it. And that is a very important distinction. Now let's talk about why boundaries feel like betrayal in unhealthy systems. In a healthy family, a boundary may be disappointing, sure. It may even create some conflict, but there is usually some ability to say, I don't like this, but I understand that you get to decide what you are comfortable with. In dysfunctional families, however, boundaries can be experienced very differently. Why is this? Well, because the family may not see you as fully separate. Your time may feel like family property. Your holidays may feel like family property. Your children may feel like family property. Your marriage may feel like family property. And your choices may feel like something everyone gets a vote on. So when you say, no, this is our decision, it does not feel like differentiation. It feels like rejection. And that is where the accusations can begin. They say things like, you've changed, your spouse controls you, you think you're better than us, you don't care about family anymore, you're so selfish. But sometimes what actually changed is not your love, it's your willingness to be managed. So let's talk about a boundary and how it removes access. One reason boundaries create such intense reactions is that they change access. Before the boundary, someone may have had unlimited access to things like, your time, your attention, your emotional labor, your home, your children, your private information, your holidays, your availability, your willingness to explain yourself. Then the boundary says that access now has conditions. And if someone has become used to unconditional access, even a reasonable limit can feel like punishment. But access is not the same thing as love. You can love someone and not give them unlimited access to you. You can care about someone and still decide, I'm not available for this conversation. You cannot speak to me that way. We won't be discussing that. If this continues, I'm going to leave. That is not necessarily rejection. It is structure. And healthy relationships, they need structure. Let's talk about the family. The family may punish the person who changes the rules. The reality is that every family has rules. Some of them are spoken, but most of them are not. Maybe the unspoken rules might be things like, don't disagree with dad. Don't challenge mom. Don't tell outsiders what happens here. Don't embarrass the family. Don't bring up old wounds. Don't confront your sibling. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. And then somebody sets a boundary. Suddenly that person has violated the rule that nobody was supposed to name. They may think, I'm just asking for respectful communication. But the family experience is, you're changing how this whole system works. And that can create enormous pressure to go back. The pressure may sound like concern of, we just miss the old you, or guilt, your mother is devastated, or shame, this isn't how we raised you, or spiritual pressure, you need to forgive, honor your father and mother, family is forever, or social pressure, everyone thinks that you're taking this too far. All of those things can be used to push someone back into the old role. So now let's talk about when peace depends on your compliance. This is the question that I would ask. Was the relationship peaceful, or were you simply compliant? Those, of course, are not the same thing. If everything stays calm as long as you agree, as long as you show up, as long as you keep quiet, as long as you don't challenge anything, as long as you absorb the criticism, as long as you keep making the first call, then what looks like peace may actually be dependence on your compliance. And when you stop complying, the tension becomes visible. That does not always mean that the boundary is healthy. Boundaries can be communicated badly, without question. They can be punitive. They can be controlling. They can be used as threats. And we have to be honest about that too. But the existence of conflict after a boundary does not prove that the boundary was wrong. Sometimes conflict increases because the old arrangement is no longer available. Boundaries expose entitlement. And this is another thing that boundaries do. They reveal what people believed they were entitled to. Your no can expose expectations you didn't even know existed. Maybe someone believed they were entitled to know everything happening in your marriage. Maybe they believed they were entitled to see your children whenever they wanted. Maybe they believed they were entitled to speak to you however they felt. Maybe they believed they were entitled to an immediate response. Maybe they believed they were entitled to your holidays. Then, the first time you say, no, that doesn't work for us, the reaction can be enormous. And you think, why is this such a big deal? Sometimes because the boundary is not being experienced as one decision. It is being experienced as the loss of an assumed right. The boundary setter often gets accused of control. Now, this one is especially interesting. A person says, if you yell at me, I'm going to end the conversation. And someone responds, you're controlling. But notice the difference. Control says, you are not allowed to yell. A boundary says, if you choose to yell, I will choose to leave. Control tries to manage another person's behavior. A boundary clarifies your response to that behavior. That distinction is really important. A healthy boundary does not say, you must become the person I want you to be, okay? It says, you are free to choose your behavior, and I am free to choose what I participate in. That is not control, that is agency. But you're hurting the family. This is where guilt can get really heavy. Someone may tell you your boundary is hurting everyone. Maybe they mean it. Maybe there is really a lot of grief there. Maybe your absence at a family gathering is painful. Maybe your decision creates disappointment. And it's important to recognize that. But pain does not automatically mean wrongdoing. Sometimes healthy decisions, they hurt. Surgery hurts, right? Rehab hurts. Truth can hurt. Accountability hurts. Grief and disappointment, both of those hurt. We cannot use someone is upset as the only test for whether something is wrong. A better question is this boundary proportionate? Is it clear? Is it connected to actual behavior? Is it intended to protect something healthy? Is there a path toward repair if circumstances change? Those are more useful questions than, did someone get mad? Okay? Now, healthy boundaries are not revenge. This is where I want to be very careful. A boundary is not, you hurt me, so now I'm going to hurt you. It is not silent treatment. It is not punishment. It is not weaponized distance. It is not trying to make someone panic. It is not withholding affection to gain leverage. Those things may be control. A healthy boundary is about stewardship. What am I responsible for? What do I need to protect? What am I willing to participate in? What am I not willing to participate in? And what consequences naturally follows if the behavior continues? For example, if the conversation becomes insulting, I'll end the call. That is clear. Another one, if private information keeps being shared, I'll stop sharing private information. That is connected. If every visit becomes hostile, we may need to visit less often. That is proportionate. Boundaries work best when they are about your behavior, not your demand for someone else's transformation. The family may test the boundary. Now, once you set a boundary, do not be surprised if it gets tested, sometimes immediately. Why is that? Well, because the system wants to know whether the old rules still work. If guilt used to get you to reverse your decision, well, the guilt may increase. If anger used to make you cave, anger may increase. If silence used to make you chase, silence may get longer. If involving other relatives used to pressure you, suddenly more people may call. That does not necessarily mean that you should become more rigid, but it does mean you should notice what is happening. The first reaction to a new boundary is not always evidence of its long-term effect. Sometimes the system pushes hardest right before it realizes that the old strategy no longer works. Now let's talk about why the good person often feels guilty. The person who sets the boundary is often the person most likely to question themselves. Why is that? Well, because they care. They're reflective. They do not want to hurt people. They value family. They want to be fair. So while everyone else may be angry at the boundary setter may already be punishing themselves internally. They'll be asking questions like, am I being selfish? Am I being too harsh? Am I dishonoring my parents? Should I just let this go? Now that self-examination can be really healthy, but it can also become another way of abandoning yourself. Humility means being willing to ask, did I handle this well? It does not require concluding that everyone else is upset, therefore I must be wrong. Now, I want to bring this into the discussion because I know we have a lot of people that are Christian that watch our content, and with whether you are or not, this is a really important thing to discuss. And that is that Jesus Christ had boundaries. And sometimes when we say that, people are really shocked by it. But let's talk about it. So for people of faith, this is really important. Sometimes we imagine Christ-like love as endless availability. But Jesus did not say yes to every demand, right? We know through Scripture that he withdrew. He left crowds. He refused to answer every accusation. He did not allow other people's urgency to dictate every decision. He confronted hypocrisy. He told the truth even when it made people angry. He loved deeply, but he was not controlled by other people's reactions. So if someone tells you that every boundary is unloving, I would challenge that. Boundaries can absolutely be used badly, but limits themselves are not unchristlike. Sometimes love requires clarity. Sometimes truth requires discomfort. And sometimes stewardship requires saying no. Now, boundaries can make reconciliation more possible. Now, this may sound strange, but healthy boundaries can actually make reconciliation even more realistic. Now, why do I say that? Because without boundaries, resentment builds. People overfunction, they tolerate too much, they stay in conversations long after they should have left. They say yes when they really meant no, and then eventually what happens is they explode, right? A boundary introduced earlier, though, might have protected the relationship from reaching that breaking point. Boundaries define what a sustainable relationship would require. They say, I want a relationship with you, but not one built on this pattern. Now, that is very different from, I never want a relationship with you ever again. Okay? Sometimes the healthiest boundary is the thing that creates the first real possibility of a healthier relationship. And that's why we are pro-boundaries, is because we're pro-healthy relationships. Now, you do not need everyone to agree with your boundary, and this may be one of the hardest lessons. A boundary does not become valid only when everyone understands it. You may do your best to explain it clearly. They may still disagree. You may communicate respectfully. They may still call you selfish. You may leave the door open to repair, and they may still tell other people that you cut them off. At some point, you have to decide whether your integrity depends on their agreement. It should not. You should be open to feedback, open to correction, open to changing your mind, but not every accusation deserves authority over your conscience. Okay? So I want you to ask yourself these questions if you are trying to figure out whether your boundary is healthy. You can ask things like, what behavior am I responding to? What exactly am I asking for or limiting? Is my boundary about what I will do, or am I trying to control what they must do? Is the consequence proportionate? Have I communicated clearly? Am I willing to own my part? Am I leaving room open for repair? Am I acting from wisdom or from revenge? And maybe, most importantly, would I still believe this boundary was necessary if nobody applauded me for it? Now, that is a hard question, isn't it? But I think that it's a really, really important one. Now, the goal is not distance. And this is where I want to end this video. The goal of boundaries is not distance for distance's sake. The goal is health. Sometimes health allows closeness, and sometimes it requires more space. Sometimes a boundary can soften over time. Sometimes it needs to remain. But the point is not to punish people. The point is to stop participating in patterns that destroy trust and peace and love. If the family punishes you for creating a healthy boundary, that does not automatically mean that you have failed. Sometimes it means the system is adjusting to a version of you that no longer sacrifices yourself to keep everyone else comfortable. So, if you've ever set a boundary and suddenly became the villain, if you were called selfish for saying no, if people tolerated years of unhealthy behavior but became furious when you finally stepped away, I want you to remember this. The boundary may not have created the dysfunction. It may have exposed how much the old system depended on your compliance. Own what belongs to you. Communicate clearly. Stay humble. Be willing to repair when it is yours to repair. But do not assume that someone else's discomfort means that your boundary is wrong. Healthy peace can survive honesty. Healthy love can survive limits. And healthy relationships do not require one person to disappear in order for everyone else to stay comfortable. If this video resonates with you, let me know in the comments. Have you ever been treated like the problem simply because you set a boundary? And if you're navigating difficult family relationships, boundaries, estrangement, reconciliation, marriage, faith, or of course healing while trying to hold on to both truth and compassion, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. That's exactly what we talk about here on Cleave Answers. And if you haven't watched the other episodes in this series, why dysfunctional families turn against the truth teller, why they need a scapegoat, and why they protect the most difficult person, watch those next, because these patterns are deeply connected. And until next time, you are allowed to say no without becoming the villain. I hope you have a great day.